first started teaching this course a number of years ago, I felt like I needed to bring in the complicated information and really just press down on them that they really need to know this. And I found out early on that that's not what they needed, and they weren't responding to that.
I think with Dr. Green, when you sit in one of his classes, you don't just take notes on the PowerPoint and study for the test. He takes the time to make it geared towards things you're actually going to use out in the field. Whenever you're sitting there in class, you can't help but pay attention because you know the things that he's teaching are going to be directly used in your career. For instance, he might bring in a soil test that's been to Soils Lab at Mariana and bring that in and say, calculate the fertilizer for what a 200 bushel corn crop would use and tell me how much it's going to cost. Somebody like me can take that and actually use it towards a farmer, especially in fertilized sales.
So I realized early on that the students had figured out that they could earn a B in the class and ignore some of the more difficult concepts and content. The fertilizer calculations are difficult, and they just try to avoid it because it's difficult. So what I decided that I didn't like that. I wanted them to learn that information, and so I developed these 5 competency quizzes to really encourage them to master that information.
On the first day of class, when you hear you're going to have this many tests that you have to score 100 on, you might be sitting there going, wonder what I can substitute for this, that we don't have to take this many tests. Like this summer, looking back, I'm thinking, man, I'm sure glad we studied this hard. I'm sure glad we went over this more than once.
Since I've started this, nobody has failed to master these content and concepts. I give them multiple chances to retake the quizzes until they master it.
You realize that, hey, I'm going to have to remember these, and just because something's on your first test, you better hold on to it because you're using it in all your homework, and it's going to more than likely appear in some way, shape, or form on the next test all the way through the final. So it's not like you learn something and then move on to something else. You're learning and carrying it with you.
If a student is struggling with a particular competency quiz, we'll go over the material in my office, at the board. In fact, one of the whiteboards in the ag building, I call the war board, where we'll sit around and we'll do calculations again and again and again. It's all about success. I want them to get to the point where they feel successful and are successful in these difficult content areas. Many times in the summer, when many of them are on internships, they'll send me an email or they'll call me and say, Dr. Green, I was in the field with my boss and I was engaged in that conversation because of this particular thing that you taught in the course. Now, since I've implemented these competency quizzes, I'm seeing a trailing grade distribution where I have 75, 80% A's and B's, and then trailing C's and D's. And that makes me feel good.